Our community is a very special kind of little community. By virtue of being rare, we're accustomed to being misunderstood. For many of us, like we talked about this morning, our challenges are invisible. When we're struggling, we're also often burdened with having to explain ourselves, and sometimes even having to convince people that, yes, we really do need that seat on the bus, or that accessible parking spot, or help lifting things, or maybe even a day off in bed. And I think that's why there's so much value in our little community. With the people in this room, I don't have to explain myself. You all get it immediately, either because you're going through the same kinds of things yourselves, or someone that you love is. I call this the I get it factor. And for me, it's beyond helpful. It's absolutely necessary for maintaining my mental health, my sense of self within the context of this disease that can be totally overwhelming. PHA Canada's overarching mission is to unite the Canadian PH community so that we can all benefit from the I get it factor. And in this work, we owe a great deal of thanks to our keynote speaker today, Angie Knott. Angie came to us from the PH Association in the United States and was tasked as the first national manager of PHA Canada with putting the vision of the first board of directors into action. Angie's dedication, innovation, and passion were integral to taking the pockets of support that existed across the country and uniting them into this amazing community that we have today. Having had the pleasure of working with Angie at PHA Canada, I can say firsthand that she regularly went above and beyond to provide support to so many of us when we needed it. She organized the conferences where many of us first met. She came back from her maternity leave after 4 months because there was just so much to do. And she laid the foundation for PHA Canada to be recognized by Imagine Canada as an accredited nonprofit organization. I remember our days in the office with Shirley and Bronwyn and Russell very fondly. We still meet sometimes for old school brunches. And we were all just working our hardest towards shared goals of awareness, early diagnosis, and building and supporting this incredible community. Angie supported me personally through the challenges that I faced as a working mom with pulmonary hypertension, and at the same time never doubted my abilities in my role as a community relations coordinator. Angie's encouragement and leadership gave me the confidence that I needed to get back into the workforce full-time, and I will always be grateful to her for that. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming my very good friend, Angie Knott.
All right, I'm going to try and do this without crying, but it's probably not going to happen, so bear with me. It's really a great honor to be here today with you to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of PHA Canada. See, I'm crying already. This organization, and so is my baby, this organization, and even more importantly, the PH community, mean a tremendous amount to me. Thanks, Jamie. And while I'm no longer engaged with the community day to day, this cause, the patients, the caregivers, the medical professionals, and all those who dedicate their lives to making living with PH a little more tolerable will remain near my heart forever. As we celebrate 10 years of PHA Canada, I'd like to take a little trip with you down memory lane today. From very humble beginnings, from the sheer will of a handful of people, PHA Canada was born. I'd like to go back in time now to those beginnings and take you on a bit of journey from then until now. I came to the PH community in early 2006, back when PHA Canada was but a dream in the minds of a few determined people. At the time, I had been hired as the International Program Manager at the American Pulmonary Hypertension Association, and it was my job to help bring together the international PH community, which was not very big at the time, and to help it grow through sharing best practices of those associations who had been around for a while and who were a little more established, the US, the UK, Japan, and a handful of others, primarily in Europe. It was an exciting time as many, many new associations were forming around the world, in Asia, in Europe, in Eastern Europe, in Latin America, in Africa. In Canada at the time, there were some local support groups spread around the country, as well as a handful of provincial associations. The BC PH Association, which was the most established and had secured charitable status, the Edmonton PH Society, New Brunswick PH Society, and the Quebec Society HTAPQ, which was just getting running. In Manitoba, a long-standing PH support group, which was associated with the clinic, existed, as did a few small support groups attached to local clinics in Toronto, in Montreal. There was also the PH Society of Canada, which had been started by a lawyer from Windsor named Leon Peroyan. Leon's wife and daughter had both been diagnosed with and had lost their lives to PH. And Leon's primary focus was on funding research in order to be able to find a cure for PH, and he was exceptionally good at it. PHSC funded many research projects at Ontario PH centres. But with its efforts focused primarily in Ontario, PHSC was not a truly national organization, and it lacked the grassroots community building aspects that many within the community desired, and which was booming in other countries. In the early days of my work at PHA in the US, being Canadian, I became particularly interested in what was happening with the PH community here in Canada. And then I met Liz. Liz McCall was a firecracker, and every time I talk about her, I can't help but cry, so bear with me. She was one of the longest surviving PHers in BC at the time, which was no small feat, given that survival prognosis at that time was only a few years, and medications other than Flolan were just starting to become available. Liz was the founder of the BC PH Society, and upon learning that not only was I from Canada, but also from BC, Liz took me under her wing, and she shared the dream she and a few others around Canada had to create a united, national, patient-centered awareness and advocacy association, similar to what PHA was doing in the US. That was early 2006, and in June that year, some Canadian leaders, including those who would become PHA Canada's founders, as well as a few others, some of whom are in the room today, Jazz and Betty Ross, and Dawn Bell, and Diane McGuire, and Dareth Hawes from Manitoba, and Gordon Wilnatoombs from PEI, came together at a Canadian meeting during PHA USA's 2006 International Conference in Minneapolis. Leon was also there, and the leaders had hoped to discuss with him broadening the scope of the work of PHSC to turn it into a truly national patient support, awareness, and advocacy organization, which was what they envisioned for a national organization. That meeting didn't go as well as planned, but a handful of the key people, mostly those you saw recognized yesterday. Liz, Jennifer Gendron, Linda Berriot, Sharon Proudfoot, and Darren Bell left that meeting more determined than ever to make a national Canadian organization come to life. From 2006 onwards, several key meetings were held, with Dr. Mehta joining the others in early 2007. In late 2007, early 2008, those meetings succeeded. Leon, who had sadly taken ill himself, agreed that in order for PHSC to survive and to live on, it made sense for this group of dedicated, determined individuals to carry on its legacy. On March 31st, 2008, the existing board of directors resigned from PHAC, and on April 1st, the new interim board, composed of those who are now, alongside Leon, considered the founders of PHA Canada, took over the organization. Darren became the first board president, and the headquarters was moved from Windsor to Vancouver. The name was changed to PHA Canada to match the movement of PH associations around the world. And the PH nurse coordinator from Vancouver, Carol Storseth, joined the PHA Canada board shortly thereafter to allow us to have representation from Canada's PH nurses as well. And just to give you a bit of a picture of what a different world it was at that point, the Vancouver PH program consisted of Dr. Ostro, Dr. Levy, Dr. Swiston had just joined, and Nurse Betty Ross was there, and Carol coordinated the program part-time, splitting her time between PH and transplant, and that was it. I started as PHA Canada's first, and at the time, only employee at the beginning of July 2008, and I had just returned after working at PHA USA for 2 years. The landscape in those early days was much different, and the challenges we faced, including uniting all of the existing societies and support groups under one umbrella so that the community could speak with one unified national voice. We needed the PH centers, which were the bedrock of the community, to know about us and to help us spread the word to their patients. So Darren and I went on a cross-country tour, meeting with all of the nurses and doctors at the PH centers and meeting as many support group leaders and other community members as possible. We did a lot of learning as we progressed in those days. We started to connect people and knew that opportunities for face-to-face interaction, like what you're doing here today and this weekend, were a critical aspect of what we needed to do. So, with very few resources and not a ton of experience, we set out to organize and host our first conference. This happened on this very weekend in September of 2009 in Montreal. PHA Canada's corporate committee was also instrumental in helping all of these events take place by providing a lot of the sponsorship necessary for us to be able to put them on. And I know that some of the original representatives of that corporate committee are still around, and I had the pleasure of seeing a few of them last night. We continued to pick up momentum from there, advocating for the PH community in Ontario when funding for combination therapy was suddenly pulled, leaving patients with the possibility of no funding for Flolan. And social media was still a baby back then, but it was starting to take off, and we managed to connect with patients through our website and through Facebook, and the community began to grow and unite. We launched Connections, which was a small newsletter at the time, and the very first issue was put together entirely by a volunteer patient, Carolyn Robinson. More community members began getting involved. The Toronto support group grew into the Toronto chapter, and we had the pleasure of adding Loretta and Ruth and many other amazing individuals to the community. A group formed in London, and we met Grace and Marion and many others. Lynn Marie Cox, who I also can't talk about without crying, who led the Edmonton PH Society, joined the board and became its secretary. And the Edmonton PH Society later actually became a chapter as well. And Sandy and Darwin and Michelle from Saskatchewan formed a support group. And Sandy and Darwin also joined the PHAC board. Interestingly, Sandy and Michelle had met at that first PHA conference in Montreal. They had sat together at a table, not knowing that they were from Saskatchewan, thinking there was nobody else from Saskatchewan there. The momentum was palpable. The community was coming together, and we were getting things done. PHA Canada relied heavily, and still does, as you all know, on the involvement of volunteers and members of the community. As momentum grew, and as the community grew, and as we developed new programs, there came a need to hire new staff. A staff of one and a volunteer board could not handle the volume of things that were happening. We were creating a ton of new materials for patients and caregivers and things to educate the public. We were receiving memberships and donations and sending out connections each quarter. We were starting to drown in paper. I joked often that our very first office, which was me surrounded by boxes, was starting to look like an episode of Hoarders. So we hired Shirley Wong in 2011 as our administrator, and we moved to our larger office. We continued to build community, create new programs and resources, and host a national conference every other year in Toronto, in Ottawa, and then in Montreal again. We grew. In 2012, we added a communications associate, Bronwyn McBride, who several years later was replaced by Marianne, who most of you know when Bronwyn left to pursue a master's degree in public health. We expanded our volunteer program, and in 2013, we hired Tarja as our volunteer and community relations coordinator. Tarja was the first PH patient employed by PHAC, and later, when she moved on to a career with the BC Nurses Union, she became one of our first ambassadors. In a relatively short amount of time, the organization grew and the community rallied like never before. PHA Canada was coming out of its infancy at a breakneck speed. We had worked hard and fast to build programs and to unify the community, and now it was time to ensure that the organization was built upon a strong foundation that would allow it to continue to grow and thrive and serve the PH community beyond the involvement of any one single individual. We spent the best part of a year, and Tarja alluded to this in her introduction, refining and creating and writing down organizational standards in order to become accredited by Imagine Canada. Many of you may not know it, but that seal that you see on PHA Canada materials means that this organization is among the elite not-for-profits in Canada who are financially accountable, transparent, and well-managed. It's something that the community should be very proud of. Since the end of my tenure serving the PH community as the national manager, it's been so rewarding to see the community continue to unite and speak as one. It's heartening to see all of the friendship and all the support that this organization has helped to facilitate, and the fact that it has continued to allow those who face PH to feel less alone. So much progress has happened in the last 10 years, both in the organization and in the world of PH. There is more community and there is more hope. But the reality is that we've lost a tremendous amount of great people along the way. Liz, Sandy, Lynn Marie, Linda, Rita, Harry, Amanda, Serena, and you all know that this list is much, much longer. All those people gave of themselves throughout the years to support the community. And I'm comforted by knowing that their efforts and the efforts of all of you have been and continue to be what makes this organization as special and as successful as it is. A community and an organization which represents that community can only be as strong as the people who carry it. You should all be proud of yourselves. It's the most amazing community of which I've ever had the pleasure to be part of. Thank you for letting me share it with you, and here's to the next amazing 10 years.
On behalf of the board of directors, and all of us here today, I just want to thank Angie for being here with us and for all of her amazing contributions to the PH community. We're very grateful to all that she's done to support this community over the years. So